We'll call the meeting to order and have a roll call.
Mr. Fiddler.
Here.
Mr. Overland.
Here.
Mr. Love. Mr. Burridge.
Here.
Mr. Huckabee.
Here.
Mr. Alexander.
Here.
Mr. Burgess.
Here.
Mr. Reed.
Here.
Chair notes we have a quorum to conduct business. And before we get started, I'd like to take a little bit of time to remember Herschel Crow, who recently passed. And, you know, from my standpoint, I met Herschel when I sat on my second commission, and he did such a wonderful job with such a young guy, and teaching me what to do and being the glue of the commission. And I'd like to call on the secretary to say a few words about Herschel, if you would, Mr. Secretary.
Well, and you're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Crow and Chairman Crow and Commissioner Crow was a longtime friend of both Mike and I. And Mike may want to have a few words as well to say about it from his standpoint. But he was chairman at the time that we had the tragedy at Weber's Falls, and was one that, as secretary at Weber's Falls, and he was able to keep the politics out of extremely difficult situation that the department was in that drew international attention at the time, and was able to allow us to do our job. The commission worked very well in that effort as well, and he was also cabinet secretary when the commission passed the first 8-year program. And I always remember his support in going from a system that wasn't working well to a system that I think that Mr. Patterson, and again, Director Patterson can attest to, has worked very well. And he was cabinet secretary at the time, and we all will miss Secretary Crow. He certainly had some good one-liners, and that we all appreciated from time to time. And but Mike, you may want to say a few words, but we're going to sorely miss him, and our thoughts and prayers are with Betty.
Well, and you're exactly right, Gary. I first met Herschel Crow when he was a senator, and so he was a transportation champion, even as a member of the Senate, and played an important role for Southwest Oklahoma. And then when he became a member of the commission and our chairman, and that's really, I think, we saw a lot of dynamics change. Chairman Burridge talked about how he mentored young, you referred to yourself as a young person coming onto the commission, and clearly you were back then. But not anymore, but back then. But he had that teaching style, and I think that came from his time as a coach and a teacher. He was always wanting to help people understand and give guidance, and he will be sorely missed. He was a transportation champion that set a new dynamic for the agency, and I know that Commissioner Burridge back then often said, "The truth will just set you free," and that was really a lot of the emphasis behind the 8-year plan that Chairman Secretary Crow helped us get on. Thank you.
Well, we might note that his passing was quite a celebration. It was unlike any that I've been to before, if you weren't there. But Herschel also, you guys were important to him. And I don't mean as a group, I mean individually. He, to my knowledge, started a tradition that we've had for over 15 years now of having Christmas dinner together. Many of you may not know this, but since the time that Governor Keating put us on the commission, we've ate Christmas dinner together as that commission, that setting commission. Jimmy Austin was the first to pass. And we currently enjoy that every December, and there's not one person that would think about missing that Christmas dinner. It's going to be interesting since the glue that held that together is gone now. You know, wouldn't put that obligation on Betty, but he kept us all together. And as a result of that, many good conversations about you guys, about transportation, about what needed to be done, how it could be done, continued to happen. And we kept people interested that their time on the commission or involved in the state government had passed. So with permission of the commission, I'd ask for a few moments of silence. Thank you. Director Patterson, do you have anything further? I'd like to call on Tim to make an announcement.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, Commissioners, Secretary. I'd like to announce that we have a new Chief of Right-of-Way and Utilities Division. I'll have him stand up first, and then I'm going to give a little background. So, Mr. Blackwell, please stand up. Mr. Blackwell began his career with ODOT in 1984 as a drafting technician in roadway design and became a roadway design squad supervisor in 1998. He moved to Right-of-Way and Utilities Division in 1999 and was selected as acquisition manager in 2002. He became the operations manager of Right-of-Way and Utilities Division in December of 2013, and he held that title until his current position as the new Chief of Right-of-Way of Utilities of Right-of-Way and Utilities Division. He and his wife Kathy live in Moore, and they have 3 children. So please help me welcoming him to his new position. Thank you.
I apologize for being so familiar, Mr. Tiegler. By calling you Tim, you know, for some of you that are visiting, he's our Director of Engineering, and we'd like Paul Green, our Director of Operations, to come up for an announcement. Did I do better that time?
That's great. I go by anything. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Mr. Secretary, it's with great pleasure to inform you that Brad Mirth, stand please, Brad, has been selected as the new state maintenance engineer. Brad's been with us for 29 years. 24 of those have been in Duncan. He served the last 9 as the assistant division engineer over maintenance, has also served as a traffic engineer, and he worked at a Oklahoma City residency before that. So certainly welcome Brad to his new position, and he came from a group of excellent applicants. Him and his wife live in Duncan and will be relocating, so we look forward to that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We'll move to item 105 to be presented by the General Counsel.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, members of the Commission. At the Commission meeting of July 6th, the quorum of 5 commissioners was present. Concerning agenda item number 87, approval of the minutes of the June 1st regular meeting and the June 30th special meeting, as well as agenda item number 89B, sale of access rights, a member of the Commission abstained, resulting in 4 votes on these agenda items. The Commission at the time was advised that a majority vote of a quorum was sufficient to approve these items. The Commission at that under the Open Meeting Act, that is a correct interpretation. However, on further review, it was determined that Commission rules, specifically Commission Rule 731-3-2, subsection C, states that all official acts of the Commission shall be by a majority vote of the total Commission. Therefore, 5 yes votes would have been required to approve these items. At this time, then, it is requested that the commission approve agenda item number 87 of the agenda of the July 6th meeting, which is the approval of the minutes of the June 1st and June 30th meetings. Your approval of Part A is requested.
You've heard the recommendation of Mr. Hill, our general counsel.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second, any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Part B, based on the action taken concerning agenda item 89B, the department filed a deed of record selling certain access rights to the Okmulgee Area Development Corporation. At this time, it is requested that the commission approve agenda item 89B from the agenda of July 6, 2015, and ratify the department's action in the filing of this deed of record for those access rights. Your approval of Part B is also requested.
You've heard general counsel's recommendation. What's your pleasure?
Should I abstain? Make a motion to approve. Norman, yeah.
Second.
Have a second? We're having discussion that needs
Should
to
I
be
abstain?
public.
I'm going to abstain because I'm one of the people. You can either way. Either way, I'm all right. Are you yes to it? Yeah. Okay, okay.
You can tell us what your discussion was about.
Commissioner Fiddler was asking if it would be all right for him to vote affirmative on this because he was the commissioner who abstained at the July 6th meeting. And I told him it was okay to vote.
Thank you. You've heard the recommendations. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Both items passed. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hill. Item 106 is the approval of the minutes of the Transportation meeting on July the 6th, 2015. What's your pleasure?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Motion passes. The consent docket is item 107, A through H, and 108. If any member of the commission would like to pull one of those items out and talk about them separately, with the consent of the commission, we'll do so. Otherwise, we'll hear a motion regarding all of the consent docket.
Motion to approve the consent docket.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Regan.
Yes. Right there.
Motion passes. Our Director of Engineering, Mr. Tiegler, will call on you to present item 109.
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, item 109 is the programming item. It's in Canadian County, District 4. This is a project to repair vehicle impact damage to Courtney Road over I-40 located 12.2 miles east of the Caddo County line. It's requested, the party responsible is known. This is for $25,000. Approval is recommended.
Heard the recommendation. What's your pleasure?
Motion approved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Are they going to pay us? Is it insurance or?
Yes, sir. They do have insurance, so they have been put on notification.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Tiegler. That's item 109. You can present 110.
110 are our engineering contracts. I have 3 this month. Part A is a statewide contract for services to fill our obligations under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA of 1969, and the National Historic Preservation Act to include cultural resources studies and mitigation efforts. I have 4 firms. It's Burns and McDonald, Cox McLean, CP&Y Mead and Hunt. This is a $2 million contract, $500,000 each. Part B is Osage County, District 8. This is to provide preliminary engineering and prepare construction plans for State Highway 11 from Barnesdall, extending southeast approximately 2 miles. This is with Craig and Keith Line for just under $885,000. Part C, Tulsa County, also in Division 8, is to provide engineering and construction plans for State Highway 20 intersection modification. This is also with Signals at 145th. This is with McClellan Consulting Engineers for just under $140,000. Approval is recommended.
You've heard the presentation. What's your pleasure on item 110?
Move to approve. Second.
I have a motion and a second. On item A, what's the cash burn or the use of that contract?
I'm sorry? What's the?
What's a better way to ask that? How often do you utilize that?
Oh, just as necessary as we need it. I mean,
So
sometimes
how much do
we'll-
you normally spend before, and how long does it last?
Right. This is, I believe, typically a 2-year contract, and we will use those as we need if we can't do the in-house
Yeah,
coordination, but I'm sorry,
okay.
I guess I don't understand.
How
the
much of
question.
that do you think you're gonna use in 2
Oh,
years?
Probably a good portion of it, if not all of it.
Do you know what you used last time?
I don't at this time, but I will get that information.
I believe we've used the full value of
Okay.
the ones that we have.
And if we run out, Commissioner, then we would obviously
Gotcha.
go to a supplemental.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Overland.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Motion passes. We'll hear item 111.
111, I have 3 engineering contract supplements this month. Part A is Custer County. This is for I-40 from mile marker 68.7 to 76.6, and then 76.6 to 83.9. This is with Leidos Engineering, which used to be Benham. This is a supplement for $40,000. Part B is in Caddo County, in District 7. This is with, or it's on US 281, south of Cummins Road. This is with Olson Associates for just over $50,000. And then Part C is in Love County in District 7 also. This is for the final construction plans for US 77 Railroad. That's overpass approximately 1.9 miles north of the junction at Thackerville. And this is with professional engineering consultants for just under $6,000. Can answer any questions, and approval is recommended.
You've heard the recommendation.
Motion to approve item
We have a
111.
motion.
Second.
Have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler. Mr. Overland.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Motion passes. We are at item 112. Mr. Atkins.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, members of the Commission, item 112 consists of the final October and the tentative November 2015 bid openings. Approval of item 112 is recommended.
There you
Motion to
have it.
approve.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Overland.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, sir. We'll hear item number 113. Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, Commissioners, I'd like to present item number 113, parts A through R. These are the change orders, a cumulative total of $50,000 or less. This is presented for your information only, no actions necessary. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Doesn't appear to be any questions. You can move on.
Okay. Item number 114, parts A through S. These represent change orders with a cumulative total greater than $50,000, and your approval is recommended.
You've heard the recommendation of the department on the change orders.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. We're at item 115.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Secretary, Commissioners. Item 115 are the awards from the July 15th and July 23rd bid openings. Part A is the July 15th bid opening, which was the emergency letting. It was call order number 6 at that time. It was an emergency repair of the roadway and bridge approach on State Highway 78. Contract was awarded to the Cummins Construction Company for $1,223,625.28. This item was approved at the June 30th, 2015 Emergency Commission meeting. It's an information item only, but I will take any questions you might have. All right. Item B are our recommendations from the July 23rd regular letting. It is recommended that the following items from the letting, referred to by call order, be awarded to the low bidders. Those are call orders 20, 25, 30, 40, 45, 50, 60, 100, 110, 120, 135, 140, 170, 180, 190, 200, 205, 210, 230, 240, 250, 260, 280, 290, 300, and 310. It is recommended that the following item from the letting, referred to by call order, be rejected. Call order 150 in lieu of the Tide project, which was call order 170. This concludes recommendations for award, and your approval is requested.
You've heard the recommendations. What's your pleasure?
I make a motion that we approve.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
The item passes, and we'll move to item 116 for a presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Mr. Secretary. In accordance with federal law, the Department has prepared the 2015 through 2040 Oklahoma Long Range Transportation Plan. This plan is a policy document that guides ODOT in the development, management, and operation of the state's transportation system. The document was developed in coordination with the Freight, Personal Travel, and Tribal Advisory Committees, and in conjunction with public input received over the past year. A summary of public involvement activities is included in the plan document. The final draft of the 2015-2040 Long Transportation Plan was available for public review and comment from July 16th to August 5th, 2015. The Long Range Transportation Plan will help provide a long-term vision for highways, rural public transit, waterways, state-owned rail, airport access, and pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It addresses goals related to safe and secure travel, infrastructure preservation, mobility choice, connectivity and accessibility, freight and economic vitality, environmental responsibility, and efficient intermodal system management and operations. The plan also proposes performance measures related to several of those topics. Updated every 5 years, the plan takes into consideration the transportation needs and preferences of Oklahomans. The proposed 2015-2040 Oklahoma Long Range Transportation Plan incorporates by reference the Metropolitan Planning Organization Long Range Transportation Plans from the Fort Smith, Lawton, Oklahoma City, and Tulsa metropolitan areas. Upon receiving Commission approval, the plan will be forwarded to the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administrations. The Department recommends approval of the 2015-2040 Oklahoma Long Range Transportation Plan.
Chair will hear a motion on the long-range plan.
Motion approved.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion? Director Patterson, would you like to make a comment now or later? Later. Secretary Ridley? All right. Any other discussion regarding the long-range plan? Call the roll.
Mr. Fiddler.
Aye.
Mr. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes. Call on the director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, members of the commission. Just to follow up on what Mr. Hooton was just talking about, the long-range plan. As David indicated, it is a policy direction for the agency. I heard last week in a conversation a brief conversation that I had, and also saw it in writing, that perhaps this was a replacement for the 8-year construction work plan. It is not. This is simply a policy direction for the agency as we have gathered information from stakeholders across the state, both corporate, political, and citizens of Oklahoma, on what they think the transportation system needs are in the future, along with the input of this agency on what we think the long-range transportation policy should be. So, as we certainly appreciate your approval of this, and now we can turn it over to the Federal Highway Administration and begin the task of following this as best we can with the funding and finances that are available to us. But rest assured that it is not a replacement for the 8-year plan. And to that, the 8-year plan will be presented to you next commission meeting. And we have meetings with you, each of you individually scheduled between now and then. And we have one last meeting with our division engineers this afternoon. I think, what do we call that, Paul? The lightning round will take place this afternoon with the division engineers to make sure that we have everything buttoned up before we come see you. And certainly you guys have provided us some input as we've gone through this process, and we really appreciate your insights, because you have the insight of the community and the region of the state that you represent. So we'll be back to you next month with the 8-year plan. I wanted to just take a few minutes and update you where we are with our emergency relief effort. As you recall, it started raining and it didn't quit raining, and it just rained, and all kinds of things got crazy after that. But in going through that process and explained at one commission meeting, we talked about the difference between ER, emergency relief, that goes through the Federal Highway Administration, and FEMA, that goes through the Office of Civil Emergency Management. And here at ODOT, we take care of the ER program and deal with the Federal Highway Administration. And it is some county roads, major arterials are included on the county road system, and all of our state highways and interstate highways. So our ER costs that we have now completed our assessments are currently at a $28 million level. And thus far, with all the documentation that we've turned in to the Federal Highway Administration, they have approved, and they're still going through the process, so don't get excited. They've approved $16.5 million. And so they're going through their process. And as you know, we have, for the most part, completed all of our repairs that needed to be made. We still have some work to do. You will recall that we had highways completely closed that are now reopened. We had highways and bridges that were partially closed that are now open. And we're really proud of that fact, because this agency has worked night and day, at times 24 hours a day, for weeks on end, to get the highways back open. And on top of that, to help the counties and county commissioners get their county roads back open. I think we've been very successful at that. We made additional cash available to the county commissioners so that they could go ahead and get started on their efforts. We through you, did an emergency letting on a county road so that we could, in Canadian counties, so we could get that road rebuilt quickly, got it reopened. So we have done many things that we could not have done previously. We've done them this time because changes in federal law, federal regulations have allowed us to do that. One notable project that has had garnered, if you will, the public's attention most recently is the I-35 through the Arbuckles. And again, thank you for coming in for a special commission meeting so we could get started on that project. But we were able to reopen traffic in 51 days, which I believe is about 16 days ahead of schedule. And able to do that through some modification to the hauling contract. If you recall your efforts, we were able to approve not only bringing the rock down and all the rock mitigation issues, but also there was a separate contract for hauling. Our contractor handling that, we changed his contract a little bit, able to help him with some additional costs, and so he was hauling virtually 24 hours a day to get the rock. And that rock was about 14,000 tons once we got it peeled off the mountain. We're not finished in that area yet. We still have to go back and secure and make sure that as best we can, there won't be any additional failures in that area. But I'm really, a big shout out to Division 7, Bob Rose, Jay Earp, and their team for staying on top of this project. Many times it was the lead story on the newscast. We had helicopters flying over watching dynamite going off because it was different. It was different for us. It was different for the state of Oklahoma. And for that reason, I need to do another shout out, if you will, and I've done this before, to the Colorado Department of Transportation. Shaylin Batt, their director, called me and said, how can we help? And I said, send me a rock guy. And so Ty Ortiz came down the day before Father's Day, spent the day with Paul Green, crawling all over that rock and coming up with his expert ideas, which we followed to a successful end. So now traffic is normalized. What a great opportunity for us to learn a little something. And with so many of these kinds of projects, it was cool to do it. I don't think we ever want to do it again, though. But we learned a lot from it. One last subject that I would bring up has to do with federal funding. At the last commission meeting, we talked about Senator Inhofe and his efforts with the DRIVE Act and moving that forward through the Senate. And he was able to do that. It has some attachments to it now that I don't think he thinks are necessarily good, and so he's working to rectify that. The House was unable to take up the bill, but they did get started on an extension of MAP 21, and the Senate has passed that extension, so we will have our federal funding through another extension through October 29th. And in the meantime, I believe the House and the Senate will be able to go to conference and bring us a good quality 6-year highway bill that will take us on into the future. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions.
I don't have any questions. Anybody have any questions of the director? I do want to know which one of those guys have the most lightning in them, though. When we look at them, I don't know that that's what we think of.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I'd call on the Secretary for his comments.
We have our Division Administrator for Federal Highways with us, Mr. Carino. I had asked Mr. Carino about 3 months ago when we had a problem with water everywhere, and if the federal government was, in his office, was going to have the personnel to be able to handle the onslaught of being able to look at projects and make a determination quickly so that the department could move forward. I'd visited with Director Patterson, and I've visited with Chief Engineer Shell over the past few weeks. And my understanding is, Gary, that you guys have done a great job, and we really appreciate the work that out of your office being able to move quickly, because as you know how important that is, and I wanted to personally thank you in front of the crowd and tell you how much we appreciate the work that you and your staff has done getting us through this effort. And we know there's still some work that needs to be done, and hopefully that'll proceed as expeditiously as the work that has already been started. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That concludes our meeting today. We'll hear a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second?
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Mr. Fidler.
Aye.
Mr. Overland.
Yes.
Mr. Burridge.
Yes.
Mr. Huckabee.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Mr. Burgess.
Aye.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Motion passes. We're adjourned.